Sorry, I want to start the question. Hello. Hello, Emmanuel.
Hi,
Can
good
anyone
evening.
hear me?
Yes, good evening.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that. So I think it's 6 o'clock on the dot, and I think we should start right away. Emmanuel or Michael. Who's anchoring? Or can I just start right away? Is any of the anchors on the call, please?
Hello. All right. Sorry, sir. I was trying to speak. wasn't working. Hello? All right. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We'll be starting now. So, today's topic. What is this now? So, our topic today is it working? Our topic today will be headed by
That's it.
Professor Morenike Ukpong, ably represented by Dr. Lawal. So, a brief about her bio. Professor Morenike Oluwatosin is a professor of pediatric dentistry at the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, in Nigeria. She holds a master's in business administration and a master's in education. She also holds a fellowship in West African College of Surgeons. She belongs to various professional associations and has bagged several travel scholarships, and has been a beneficiary of various research and international and national research grants. Professor Ukpong has served in various capacities in various national and international associations, committees, and projects. She also serves as a peer reviewer and editor board member to 26 high-impact factor health-related journals. She is a member of multiple research groups and has authored 4 books, contributed 11 chapters to books, and has over 210 manuscript publications to her credit. This bio is in no way exhaustive of our capacity, but it's a way to let us know of the capacity of a professor that will taking us on this topic, which is ably represented by Dr. Lawal. Please, you have the stage now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Definitely, that is an overabridged introduction, resume of Professor Morenike Ukpong, who is taking to this session. She had a flight delay, but luckily, I think she's available to take the presentation. I just want to confirm if she's on the call already. Otherwise, I will pick off. I guess she's still trying to join. Okay. So while we await joining the call, which she mentioned to me, I will just do some introduction and we'll take it. She will take it up once she joins the call. Please, once you notice she's on the call my attention. So research ethics is one of the key components of learning research, as I usually like to say. Research without ethics is doing something without its soul, because ethics is the soul of research. What makes us do a valuable and a research work that can be acceptable wherever in the world is when we do its ethical practice and principles included in it. And as such, we usually want to take principles of ethics as one of the early courses in our training series. And today we are going to be touching on different aspects of ethics so that you know what you need to know. Incidentally, we just concluded an ethics training in the Mandatory Writing Hub, and I've asked your facilitators or your representatives to share the links to the ethics training we did last year and the one we just concluded this year, and I'm sure they've done that. So do well to go through those videos, because definitely an hour lecture cannot do justice to what you need to know in ethics. But you must know that ethics is a key and critical aspect of what you need to know. So having said that, I think we can dive into the topic. But once Prof comes in on the call, I'm going to
Hello, sir.
hand over to her. Yes, hello?
Hello, sir. Please, I think Prof
Yes,
is on the
fine.
call now.
Oh, great, fine, okay.
Thanks, Kidus. I'm very grateful. Apologies, I had to deal with some logistic problems. Kidus, would you, how do I say, would you let me share?
Oh, they are the ones sharing. Okay, should they? Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to be saying next slide. I want to move it on my page.
Okay.
So would they take it off and then let me share?
Okay, you can take off this. Okay, so that's Prof shares from my end. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for studying. Yeah, so I joined Kudus in the middle of this, and I can assure you that he'll say exactly the things he would say, and I'll say exactly the things he've said. But for this, I'm going to move through it very fast. As you would see, there are over 5-6 things we're talking about. Each one itself can take a week to do a training on. So what I think you'd be learning today is just to touch, sensitization. You can't know it. These are things that people do as experts. You can't know everything, but be aware of everything. And as you go through the slide deck that Dr. Lawal shared with you, then you can start to deepen a little on what it is. As you've already, because you should have the slides with you, we'll be going through this 4 bullets. We'll be looking at the foundational ethical principles, the roles at IRBs, and what they do, and why it's important that you engage with them, the issue of consent, and why consent is very critical, and why confidentiality is also very critical in your practice. What do we mean by special populations, and what are those special considerations we give to vulnerable populations, which you otherwise say are special populations? And then when you plan a research, what does planning mean, what does feasibility mean, and what does budget mean? There's one bullet that you actually put in this section, which is timeline, which I did not add. I started to work on it, but I felt everybody's timeline will differ. So I did not include discussions on timeline. So at the end of the day, I would expect that you should have an idea of what the foundational ethical principles are, what institutional review boards are and their roles and processes, why consent is important and confidentiality in practice is important, and how do you practice it? And when we're talking about vulnerable populations, you should be aware what vulnerable populations are and what considerations you should give to them. And then when you're planning your project, what feasibility and budgeting is all about. So as an introduction, there are 4 critical things I want to say, which I think you must have heard over and over before we go into the project, into the discussion. The need for research. You've heard it first lecture, you've heard the second lecture. You're going to hear it 3rd, 4th, 5th until the end of April or March or April when you finish this training. Research is critical. Research is not about an agenda that you set for yourself. Research is critical for a global good, because research is the way where we generate evidence. That's the underlying word. It's not to substantiate your thoughts or your ideas or your feelings or what you want to do. It's about finding a fact. There's a truth out there. I think I heard Dr. Lawal saying that during his lecture. There is a truth out there that we want to find, and it's research that gets us to find that truth. So every layer of research outcomes gets us closer to the truth. Many times what your research finds are facts. And then someday we get to the truth, sooner than later for some. The reason why I say facts, as you do know, for example, in my own generation, we heard that you don't eat more than 3 eggs a week or something like that. Now, the fact has changed because there is a lot more sophisticated ways of learning and unlearning. And now we know that, well, I mean, of course, there's something bad in overdoing anything, but the thoughts around asking us to not eat eggs more than 3 times a day is already being defeated. So there are facts, but there's a truth. There are truths out there. And so these layers of fact gets us to the truth. There's some standard truths. So research builds nation, research matters, but that's research built on truth, not research based on you just want to produce a paper and therefore you put things together in the way that it looks like facts. It looks like you generated truth, and then you go ahead and publish it. I say this and I repeat it again. I've seen it so many times when I read many papers. from, ironically, your undergraduate students. And I can see how, because I was involved in working with them through the process, I could see how truth can be undermined in a way that a reviewer may not see it, except you decide to reproduce that study completely again, and then you will find out that there were gaps. It's not about you. Once you produce research, another person will take it and use that research as a foundation for the next step. That's the critical problem. Once it is out and the peer reviewer cannot get the gaps, it is established as facts. And then somebody else will now build on it. Ironically, once this fact that we're building on is not solid, of course, the truth we're going to try to get to, we will never reach there. And then the fact also becomes wobbly. And somewhere much later down the line, it crumbles. I can share with you a number of evidence that shows how facts were manipulated, and it actually resulted in taking critical policy decisions around the world. It's only with time that people started saying that this isn't working. And then they went back and found out that it was all based on lies. The researchers chunking out the research were all lying. But then people had died from the evidence that WHO now wrote as evidence for practice. People had died, So I think for me, that's the fundamentals. And when you understand the ethics governing research, you would know what it means to fight for the truth, to fight for authenticity, even when it is hard. And even when things are difficult, you drop it because you understand that in this industry, we need to guard research authenticity by adhering to ethics principle. The need for health research is far much more than just research. One of the things you would see with health research, like I tell people, go and look at the developmental indicators. The health is 4 out of 10. You have to look at maternal mortality, infant mortality, under 5 mortality. It is health. Health is 4 out of 10. So when you're talking about development and growth, health is critical. Health is essential. When the people you're dealing with is not well, there's no wellness, there's no well-being, then we're not going anywhere. So it's not just enough to know about research, it's also to understand the fundamentals around health research. And therefore, like I noted, ethical safeguards needs to be in place to be sure that the research we're doing, human beings are human beings. Human beings are human beings, the same human beings around the world. Guards have to be in place. Guards have to be in place to make sure that we really do the things we should do. And one of the custodians of that is those that are custodians to ethical practices. And that's why we'll be talking about IRBs as we go forward. So quickly, let's look at the fundamentals. When we talk about ethical principles, these are fundamental principles that govern the practice of research all over the world. It's not Nigeria, it's not Europe, it's not America, it's fundamental around the world. The application may, however, differ context by context, and I will show you one of this application when we're talking about consenting. There are basically 3, but 3 can be expanded to 4. The first is the respect for persons. The respect for persons is general, but when we're talking about African context, we also talk about the respect for communities. Respect for persons means that you respect every person involved in the research as an autonomous agent who is able to make up his or her mind. And whatever the decision this individual takes, you must respect it. That's autonomy. You must treat people as autonomous agents. And where that autonomy cannot be established, you look for a representative that is appropriate for that person. And autonomy is established in research by obtaining consent. Obtaining consent is not just the fact that they sign a document. The legal element of it is the fact that that consent is understood before the person signed. If that person takes you to court and say, well, I signed, but I did not understand. Hear me out. I signed, however, I did not understand what I was getting into. You are done for. You are completely done for. And believe me, at that point in time, law takes over ethics, and you might end up in jail. So many people have also advocated that we should move from the phrase informed consent to understood consent, because understanding is the fundamental. And therefore, when you go into research, please do not play with consent. We'll be talking about consent in somewhere later, where in the absence of consent, when it's an underage person, you are looking for assents. Okay, we'll be talking about that later. And there's a place for permission, which means, for example, you're going to a secondary school or a primary school, the custodians of the school, the principal, the headmistress or headmaster can only give you permission. They can never give you consent. Appropriately, the parents might give you consent, the child might give you assent, wherever it's appropriate. And where there is diminished autonomy, for example, somebody who's due to cognitive impairment, they may not be able to give you autonomy because consent, because they are not in a state to understand, like a child who is below 12 years old, or like a person who is in coma, or people who are mentally retarded in a way that they cannot comprehend. Yet you have to do this kind of research. People with those diminished authority needs to be protected. And protection comes in two ways: the IRB itself, as well as the consenting process itself. We'll be talking about that. The second thing that matters is beneficence. Every research, we'll be talking about non-maleficence shortly. Every research has harm. There is no research that has zero harm. It does not exist. What you have is minimum and moderate or high risk. There's minimal risk, moderate risk, or high risk. There is nothing that is zero. What you should be doing in whatever you do in research is to ensure that the benefit outweighs the risk. I repeat that the benefit outweighs the risk. And you must consciously derive benefits above risk. It's a conscious thing. And that is where your ethics committee comes in, because they will do the risk-benefit analysis. They will do, you may not have the competency. If you have training, you may have that competency, but your ethics committee are trained to do the risk-benefit analysis and therefore advise you appropriately in a way that you should truly minimize risk and do all things to maximize the benefit. You must, in whatever research you do, your benefit is not all the time, however, that whatever you're doing research, there's something like a direct benefit to the society. However, in the absence of that, like the many knowledge, attitude, and practice kind of study, do not leave the participants worse off. Do not leave the participants. It is in African context, because we are communitarian in our way of life. We live together. We talk about the communities. We must also think about communities, because the people in there are also part of the community. Do not leave them worse off. So like I noted, there are 5 types of risk factors. There's no research that has zero risk. It doesn't exist. It's just that it might be minimal, moderate, or high. It might be physical risk for somebody having a physical injury, financial risk. For example, you're asking people to come for your research, and then that person has to pay transport fare because of your research, and you do not reimburse the transport fare. That's financial risk. Social risk also might come, wherein because of your research, people are stigmatized. I tell a story of my friend who is gay. He's lived in his community forever, but because the research was looking out for gays, they came to, and people knew that was the research. This research guys came to the house of this person to collect data. That was how the community knew he was gay. And they burnt his house, burnt his property. He had to run away to US, and we had to look for money to get him out of the country because his life was at risk. That was a research that brought risk to that person. That also, I remember in the days of HIV, people are known to be HIV, working in the HIV field very early in the HIV epidemic. When you go to people's houses, they immediately tag that person to be living with HIV, and that is social stigma. So your research can actually bring social risk to people. It can bring psychological risk by the stress, by the memories it recalls. You can say you are doing knowledge, attitude, and practice research, but then it causes psychological stress. A typical example was a case of somebody doing a knowledge, attitude, practice questionnaire study. I was asking widows about when their husband died, when they had sex, last time they had sex. And these people started crying a number of times because you're bringing memory and trauma. Or you're going to ask people about rape. Had they had rape before? How did they deal with rape? These are people who are trying to put behind their trauma, and your research is bringing it out in a way that they have to now start to deal with trauma that they are trying to forget. So your research can do this risk. Or it might be legal risk, where because of the things you've done, you're subjecting this person to legal risk. For example, a person who had killed somebody and had lived your life, behind a wall and nobody knew, but your research is now making, that this set of people are, if this person has this attitude A, B, C, it is very likely that they are going to be murderers. And then people start putting things together because of your research. So there are risks, and people will expect that once you are thinking through your research, you have a right, it is your responsibility as a researcher to think through each of those possible risks and mitigate it. What are you going to put in place to reduce or bring to barest minimum any of those risks? The final thing is justice. Justice talks about fair distribution of research burdens and benefit. You cannot go to a research group, collect data, and some other people will benefit from it. That's fair distribution. And it has happened all the time. For example, I don't know if there's any of you that knows what Lagos looks like. Lagos, we know that Victoria Island is a high-broad place and the Maroko is a low-broad place. Because it's so easy for you to give people transport fare of 1,000 naira. You go to Maroko, and in one day, you collect your data, 1,000 people. But you would never go to Victoria Island because the walls are high, the dogs are there, and you cannot go knocking. At the end of the day, that research you did, for example, maybe it's contraceptive studies, you developed a new contraceptive. It is the people in Victoria Island that are going to use it, not the people in Morocco. So in effect, you have used the people in Morocco to get a result that would benefit people in Victoria Island. That's not fair distribution of research. So equitable participant selection is very important. If your study, that is why you cannot use, for example, and I use purposefully. You want to do research, you go to the prisons because it's so easy to get them. At the end of the day, the prisoners are not going to benefit from that research. You do research in the community of people that otherwise would benefit from participating in that. So there's equitable participant selection. This is a very fundamental. There are very many other things that happen in international spaces and in local spaces that looks at this context, this principles and its application, much bigger than you otherwise would want to know. Not for today. We can't go into that, but this is at the fundamentals. I'm hoping that as we go, there are questions. Dr. Lawal, please help me to look in the chat box. If there are questions, let's start to mock them up.
Okay.
The additional considerations also, when we're talking about research, it's not principles in itself or things to talk about research integrity, honesty in the conduct and the reporting of your research. That is where I was talking about, things where you do and you manipulate in the methodology. It's not true, you did that, but you write it because you know that is the ideal thing. And people cannot pick it except people that repeat. And that's why your research, when you're reporting it, the methodology must be almost like an SOP, because many times your research becomes fact only after multiple people have done that same research and are finding the same things. That's when research moves from facts to truth. That's when research moves from facts to truth. Many people will do it over and over and over again, and they're all finding the same thing. They're all finding the same thing. That was how we established that HIV was caused by a virus. That was how Ebola is established to be caused by this. That's how we know that the symptoms, the medical symptoms of a disease is this, because over and over and over and over, the researchers are saying the same thing. That's why transparency matters in the methodology. Once your methodology is not transparent, it cannot be replicated. And then it becomes an orphan research because nobody can replicate it, and you are the only one taking the seemingly glory. Ironically, it will not even be quoted. Honesty matters. Honesty matters in reporting. You cannot say that your sample size is 100, then you go and collect 20 and then multiply it by 5. That is false. You did not collect 100 samples. What you collected is 20 samples. You cannot sit there and say your sample size is 50, then you collect 10 under the tree and then multiply by 5. That's falsehood. That's fabrication. That's fabrication. Because it didn't happen. Falsification is you didn't even do it and you're writing it up, or you tamper with data so that you can tell the story you want to tell. For example, you did a study and you got a p-value of 0.054. That is not significant. But because you're forcing yourself to tell you significance, you purposefully delete the 4 and then say 0.05 because I am rounding up to 2 spaces. That's falsification. That's falsification. Or plagiarism is also something about scientific integrity that we talk about. You quote people, you quote studies, and you do not acknowledge that you present it as if it is your words, your finding, your thinking. There's nothing wrong in writing 100 references or 2,000 references, as long as you give credit to whoever had it. Worse still is to take somebody's work and then say it is yours. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen so many times. And it's ironically, if you ask me where I see most of it happen, 95% of the time is from students. They will take somebody else's abstract and then submit it as if it's their own abstract, And then when it's time, of course, to write up, you're going to fabricate because you never did that work. I've seen it happen. I'm not joking. And like I said, most times it's the students because they want to go for conferences. This is not the way to go. Once again, it is not the way to go because everything out there becomes evidence for action. And so when we start to build on false evidence, the world is crumbling. And there are many examples from the farmer, from people whose life is completely destroyed when people start to find out. I remember the case, and I tell the Harvard president, the first Black Harvard female president. She was not just the first Black, but first Black female president of Harvard. She only stayed in that space for 2 weeks. Why? Because she had a history of plagiarism. And I said, look, when she was dean, when she was HOD, nobody talked about it. It was in the height of her career that they brought up her crimes, her ethical crimes. This is not scientific, plagiarism. And in 2 weeks, she was down and out. And there are many examples like that, okay? That it is at the height of their careers. Now that what you've done is documented for life. That's why it's even worse now with social media and all things. It's documented, it's there. And it will stare you in the face at critical times of your life. Imagine when you have the height of your success and you become the vice chancellor, or you have the height of your success, you're WHO director, the first ever from Nigeria. And then the next day they bring out, this person, he can't be WHO director. He's lived his life on fabrication and falsification. That's the end. Not only you see that you're going to step down as WHO director, your career is ruined for life. Your career is ruined for life. More recently, as simple as who's this top researcher in North Korea? What happened? A student, not me, or a student, had for this AI thing that you guys do, and then it will generate false references from you. I think, unfortunately, I really felt sorry for that scientist. He probably did not check line by line, and there it was all over the place. References that never existed. That was how he resigned. That was the end of his job. That was the end of his career because his students fabricated what didn't exist. I also remember the story of the researcher whose students fabricated cloning. That was the end of his career. It was the students. And I said, look, in those places, these supervisors adjusted their students. And they wrecked their career. Oh, well, what sorry do you want to say? What sorry do you want to say to those persons who you ruin their career based on integrity? And I sit down now more and more every day when I'm going to the students, and I'm saying it with the passion in my heart because I've worked with a number of students, and I see this little lack of transparency, falsehood in the methodology. They are not meticulous, yet they will report it as though that was what they did. For example, you're doing systematic review. You never did data reliability because it was only you that was doing everything. Whereas in systematic reviews, literature reviews, a minimum of 2 persons. Then you write it up as if it was 2 persons. You didn't search properly, and then you write it up as if you searched properly. These are all fabrication, falsification. And then you put it out there. Unfortunately, it gets published in +1. +1 is not perfect because there are things that they cannot be picked. And you are smart enough not to be able to overcome those flaws. Okay? So where does institutional review boards come? In Nigeria, we do not use the word institutional review board. We use the Health Research Ethics Committee. And this is because boards in Nigeria is synonymous to allowance. Health Research Ethics Committee do not come to sit on those boards with allowance. They don't even get allowance. It's a voluntary job. However, they're independent of any systems or structure because they need to be autonomous. What they do is review the research involving humans, not just health research alone, but humans. In Nigeria, they look at the science, they look at the ethics, they look at yes, they look at the science, they look at the ethics. In other places around the world, they will just look at ethics. But in Nigerian Ethics Committee, they have the competency, they are trained to look at the ethics. However, they can engage other scientists within the institution, outside the institution, to look at the science to be sure that the science is right. Why would you look at science? Simia, please, can you mute your mic? We are distracted. Simia, please mute your mic. Or somebody who is controlling this place, please mute people's mics. So why would you look at science and ethics? It's because in any research, once the science is wrong, the ethics can never be right. It can never. The science has to be right first before ethics is reviewed. So once the science is wrong, ethics cannot be right. However, the science can be right and the ethics is wrong, because what you're looking at is looking at protecting the integrity of the persons involved. If you want to avoid exploitation. For example, you're a medical doctor, and then you're asking your patient to participate in your research. In Nigeria, a patient will not look at you and say no, even if it's inconveniencing for that person, because you as a doctor hold so much authority over the life of your patients that they will do it because they don't want their medical care compromised. In Europe, in America, they can look and say no, because number one, they understand all ramifications about science and what it means and their rights. Here, people don't even understand that. So when you're looking at that, that is the kind of things the committee will look, how independent of this process is it that this person will be able to give informed consent that is free of coercion. If I'm a researcher, a teacher, I come into the class and say, oh, give me, it's voluntary, take your class attendance, please fill the form, class captain, bring all the form. How many students will say no to that researcher? So those are things called soft coercion, and ethics committee would want to remove it, and a lot more, because they are trained to understand and remove those things that you as a researcher become blind to, not because you want to be blind, but because you are after your data. You are after your data. The primary thing that is important to the researcher is the data, and in that blindness, they can exploit participants. And it happens so much in our Nigerian system. It happens all the time with our Part 2 exams. I see it all the time where the cost of your research, you transfer it to your patients because they don't know. Okay? And I think many people don't even know that it is a mandatory regulation in the Nigerian Health Act. Sorry, it has moved from bill to act, that every research involving humans needs to get ethics clearance before you start. It is a law in the country, but people don't know, they just do it. It's a law, and so you can go to jail for it because if you don't get ethics clearance before you do it. The aim of the ethics clearance is to protect the right and welfare of participants. And you would see why consenting is very important. In the whole research process, the only place where the researcher has a voice is the consenting process. So you can't deny them of that right. So ethics committee is the eye and for the blind amongst the participants, the ears for the deaf. They are in that place as an independent authority to protect the rights and welfare of participants. Of course, secondarily, they will protect researchers themselves, but their primary goal is about the participants. Okay, and when they review the protocol, they will either review at 3 levels. It's just for you to be aware of. They will look at research that have minimal risk, that is just involved in your everyday to-day life risk. If you want to do an audit, I want to count the number of chairs in the class. I want to count the number of people that come into the airport. These are minimal risks. It does not involve everyday life. They do something called exempt review. You still get your review back in 2 weeks because it's at the table of the chair that it's approved, and then it goes back to the main committee to tell them, I have done this. However, when the risk is a little bit more than minimal risk, like there's something your whatever you're doing, your knowledge, attitude, and practice, then it's called expedited review. It is still, you get it very fast on the table of the committees, and for most parts, 98% of the research you conduct in the country would go through that. However, there's something called full committee review, where once the research is invasive please note 2 things. Once the research is invasive, that means you're going to put something into somebody's body, or once it involves a vulnerable population, we'll be looking at vulnerable populations, it automatically goes to full committee review, which means every person, every member of the board will have to sit, look at that protocol and make a determination at the end of deliberations through consensus reaching. I'll give an example when we're looking at institutional review boards so that you learn that context matters. For example, I want to do this research that is looking at how many minutes it takes every 70-year-old female to cross the road. In America, in Europe, that research will be expedited because it's nothing more than the regular life minimum risk, because they are trained and conscious that anybody that is crossing the zebra crossing, whether it is at green light or at red light, the car must stop. The car must stop. So they know that everything is in place to make sure that that car stops. So that's research that is looking at how long it takes a 75-year-old woman to cross a zebra crossing of this length will be expedited review. It can never, ever be expedited review in Nigeria. It might even be a research that might not even be approved because it is not minimal risk. It is completely full risk. Number one, the drivers don't even know what zebra crossing is. Go and put zebra crossing, and then everybody's asking, why are you painting the road black and white all of a sudden? And then when you're on the road, they will scream on you, why are you crossing, George? This old woman, go and look for your mother. You know, it's definitely not the same. So you can't take a research in America and then adapt or just contextualize it to Nigeria without looking at the peculiarities, not only of context, but of the culture of the people that makes those things different and properly adapted, you know, to be able to do the review. That's just an example. And so when you want to do, to determine, the first thing you do is determine if ethics, IRB review is needed, which means you want to know if this is research or not. The National Health Research Ethics Code actually defines that. And I tell people, if you're a researcher, there are things that are automatically companions to you. If you are a Christian, your automatic companion is the Bible. If you're a Muslim, your automatic companion is the Quran. If you're a researcher, your automatic companion is the National Health Research Ethics Code. You must know it because everything that is defined there makes research contextualized to Nigeria as opposed to any other place. You must understand what it is. So it is in that place that defines, oh, this kind of research must go to ethics for ethics review. And I tell people, whether once the research involves human beings, whether the human beings are dead or alive, whether it's human beings direct or indirect, go to ethics committee. If you're doing a research on the plants, people are going to eat that plants that you're going to work on, or animals are going to eat that plant. Please know that ethics committees in Nigeria look at both animals and humans. So that's indirect. It might, you may be in zoo, but botany, you might be in zoo. The plants that you're dealing with, people are going to eat it. That's human beings, indirect. So it goes to ethics committee. Once you are doing things on mechanical, I'm looking at cars, I'm looking at ICTs, human beings are going to use these things. So that's indirect. They must go through ethics committee. There are trainings that can be done independent of you, CIT as well as SHREC approved. What you do is write a protocol. Your protocol must have details of everything you want to do. You have your background, which justifies your study aims and your methodology. That's all there is in a protocol that goes for ethics committee. Once your ethics committee has results at conclusion, that is no longer for ethics committee. The ethics committee are supposed to review your protocol before you go to the field so that everything that might otherwise affect humans are addressed before you go to the field. Nobody reviews protocols after you have implemented, because that is no longer the purpose, the jurisdiction of the ethics committee. It becomes a matter of peer review. So you cannot have finished your study, submitted it to for publication, and then the journal says, what is your ethics review number? And then you now start to go back to ethics committee to want to collect number, saying or C, you've already implemented the study, and therefore there's nothing that they want to do to protect the participants. All right, and when you submit, you also submit your informed consent or your assent. We'll be talking about that shortly. If you have recruitment materials, if you have questionnaires or interview questions or survey guides, you must add to it. People would want to look at the credentials of the investigators, so that you know if this person is competent enough to be able to do the study. When you are students, they look at the credentials of your supervisors. So they want to know who your supervisor is. And please, I emphasize over and over again, never start research before you begin. Never start a research before you obtain your approval. I remember I was reviewing the study of somebody in West African College, and then we sent comments for review. He now came back with the comments. I told my colleague, this person has started. It's no longer flexible to address the comment because it's going to change his study, whereas he has already gone ahead and collected the data. That is what is happening, because it can no longer change. So he's not responding to your issues because he has gone ahead to collect the data. Never. And that means that if you, I don't know what it means in Uniben, in IFE, students actually do research. You don't submit your ethics approval when it's 1 month to submit your results. You submit it early so that you give the time. It might be 30 days, 60 days to go back and forth with the ethics committee, because for most times, 90% of the time, they're going to ask you to make corrections. Then you make the corrections, submit it, and then collect your ethics clearance. It comes with a number, and it's that number that you write in your manuscript. It comes with a number that you then can begin to do your research with. Okay? And one of the documents you submit is informed consent. Please, this is not more than a form. Don't just do it because of legality. Please know that this is the one place where you're providing clear information that enables people to understand what the study is. Once they have enough information to understand what the study is, then they can ensure that they have understanding. Please, one of the things you must do with understanding is provide it in a language that they can understand. The Nigerian rule says that every consent form must be written in a way that a JSS 3 student can understand it. I repeat, your informed consent, the content of your informed consent must be written in a way that the JSS 3 student can understand it. And please know that understanding also involves language. If you are going to go to a Yoruba community, the informed consent must be written in Yoruba. You don't write it in English and go there and then translate it into Yoruba. The headache with that is that the way you translate it to one participant might differ from the way you translate it to another participant. So there would not be consistency in the interpretation. You translate before you go to the field and get ethics approval for the translated document. Okay, many times what you are asked to do is translate from English to the language you want to study and then translate back to English so that there is no difference between the two, and you submit the 3 copies to ethics committee. Whatever community you're going to go to, please translate it appropriately for that community to understand. Understanding is fundamental. Understanding may mean that you also give additional information by playing videos or by using graphs or by using pictures. Understanding is a key word. Once you fail on understanding, then your study integrity is undermined and you are liable to from changing this from ethics to law. Okay? And then you must ensure voluntariness. There must be every element to show that there's freedom of coercion. Freedom of coercion in everything that you do in the transport reimbursement. Don't give people 50,000 naira for transport reimbursement. Of course, you will finish that study in 1 day. You know, at the same time, you don't exploit and not give them the transport in transport reimbursement. Please finally note that the ethics committee and the informed consent is a legal document, so it should be signed. In Nigeria, the signed consent is what the country wants, not the verbal. There's a place for verbal, it's not excluded. There's a place for verbal. Okay, but it is completely, you must record, there must be somebody else there who now signs the document. It's a whole complex thing, but there must be documentation. That is it, signed or, verbal, but the wave is towards the written consent. Okay, and when you're talking about a valid consent, there are 8 elements that if you look at the ethics code, the 8 elements that must be in a consent for you to say is comprehensive, is clearly stated in the code. There are special cases about informed consent, that things that might ask you to waive the consent when there's minimum risk. Those that do exempt, they might be liable for waiver of documentation. But there are special reasons why there might be that, or deferred consent. For example, I want to study you how many times you blink in a minute. If I tell you, please sign this consent form, I want to study you how many times you blink in a minute, you're going to blink differently. So in those kind of cases in the past, they used to look at, okay, and once I've done the study, I now come back to you. I studied you. If you want me, if you are okay for me to include your data in the bank, blah, 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 and then you do the informed consent. But more and more understanding of these things have shown that with time, that ways you can get consent before. It's just like a Big Brother. I mean, what's that? The Big Brother Africa, or this Africa brother, big things that they live in the house forever. You find out that the first day, the second day, they are pretending. By the week 2, they are normal. They don't, even if you like be watching them on the, they are back to themselves. So even if you get consenting for blinking, you might not take the blinking in the first 1-2 hours, but by the 3rd hour, the person is normal and you might take that kind of data. Or you want to go to school and study how the teacher is teaching the student. Of course, if you get consent, I want to study how you are teaching the student. You are going, the students, even the students will not answer. They'll be looking at their teacher. What kind of teaching is this today? But if you continue to do code the class for the next 2-3 weeks, you will find out that the teacher will relax and will be back. At that time, you might be able to use that. All right. Alternative form of consent can happen. For example, you have stored samples, and then you want to ask, how do I get to know this person? There are ways that the ethics committee would ask about alternative forms of consent. I've seen it happen in NIMA once, and then you put up an advert for about a year. Please, I want to do this. If you have samples you don't want it used, please come and meet us, blah, blah, blah. And then that way things can go. Assent is very important. Please note that for children in Nigeria, 12 years and above, 12 years to 17 years, you must have assent in addition to parental consent. Once they are less than 12, it's parental consent. The parents consent for them to participate in research. However, from 12 to 17, the parents consent and the children also assent. Assent is a short form of consent, and the assent supersedes parental consent, which means if the parent says the child should participate and the child says, I don't want to participate, then that assent supersedes. It's not the parental consent that supersedes, okay? So that also exists. Please note, anything from 18 and above, people give consent. People are adult enough to understand consenting. Children do not give consent because they are assumed not to have developed the mental capacity to understand risk involved. And that's the way the frontal lobes of adolescents are not that developed to appreciate risk. They always see benefits and they don't appreciate risk. So they need the parental consent. 12 to 17, they are developing enough to appreciate, but the depth of our there.
We lost it briefly. I was going
Hello?
to.
Okay, I'm back,
Yes,
right?
my yeah.
Because I can't see you anymore. So I was talking about emancipated minor. Where did you lose me?
Yeah, you were talking about assent for children and the importance of it.
All right. So I'll just quickly repeat. But if you, I don't know, I can't see you anymore. I was seeing you guys before. That's why I knew that I'd lost you. So I said that for 12 to 17, you get assent. However, there's a group of children known as emancipated minors. These are children who are independent on their own. For example, you're already in school at 15 years, which I think the Nigerian regulation doesn't allow anymore. So let's say you are 16 to 17 years, you're already in university. Nobody's going to go to your parents and say, come and sign, you know. So that would be an emancipated minor. Or if you're sadly, even if you're 9 and you're married in Nigeria, but even by the Nigerian constitution, you're identified as an emancipated minor, or you are in this minor group, you're already working and you're providing, you're even the household head, you know, at this age, and there are quite some number of children that responsible. By 16, 17, they're already household heads, they weren't working. Then they are recognized as emancipated minors, and these emancipated minors will provide consent for themselves rather than assent. Okay. Please note that confidentiality is very important also. When we talk about confidentiality, confidentiality has to do with data. Privacy has to do with the individual. So once you want to do a research and then you want to collect consent, it has to be a one-on-one thing. There's nothing called group consenting. It doesn't exist. It doesn't hold water. You can give group information, but consenting is one-on-one. You must talk to that person one-on-one, explain things, allow the person to ask questions, clarifying questions before you then ask them to sign off. Confidentiality, however, has to do with the data. Data is a big thing, enough that the country itself has data security laws and guidelines. The country as a whole has it. The issue of data security is becoming a global issue. Wars can be fought because of data security. More recently, if you are aware, Kenya signed off data to US and the world went aglow. That is the Kenyan president crazy. Data is life, and it's a big thing now. So when you collect data from participants, please don't treat it as nonsense. It's a big deal. So the data must be stored in a way called encryption. Nobody else except people that have authority to handle the data should handle the data. You should never be able to have data and people can access it. I'd seen a data once in a study and I was shocked because it was my brother's daughter's data that was there. I just saw everything, the name, everything. I said, this is my brother's daughter's data. But fortunately, it was nothing big. Imagine it was something big. And I can tell you a story of not keeping data well. And this happened in Sweden. There was this guy who was working on a database and he saw the data of his grandfather, who he loved and respected. And what did he find? He found out the data and the grandfather had been an homosexual. Yeah, they didn't know it in their family. That affected the boy up to the point that he dropped out of school. And the parents took the company on and they went to court because of it, you know. So things matter. Oh, I can tell you quite a number of stories about problems about data security. I remember one also real case in South Africa where the data was written in a way that rather than de-anonymizing it completely, they now use the initials. And when the person said, oh, this is my data, you know, and then they wrote it up in the manuscript. So the person said, this is my data. And he went to court. And he won because it was his data. And straight, you know, it was his data. And the person had to pay compensation for the rest of the life of that person. So data security matters. The way you store it. It's unbecoming for you to store data. I mean, I don't know who collects data on paper anymore, but for people that collect data, you must keep it in passworded cabinets, not put it on the floor and then somebody picks it up. Mama Peju. Actually, Mama Peju has already done 4 abortions. Jesus. And my brother wants to marry her. You know, because you're just putting people's data all over the floor, in the office, in your room. There was a case, 2 cases even in my life, where this guy had data in his car. He wasn't supposed to keep it in his car. And then they stole his car. That was the end of the data. But my heart wept because that is people's data that he put in his car because he didn't put it securely. There was another case, though I felt this was false. A whole Northeast, we had data from all geopolitical zones. And the entire Northeast, this person said he was traveling with it. I don't know who asked him to travel with it. I don't know how he got to that point. And then they had an accident into the bush and everything spilled. And that study, we lost completely 100% data from Northeast. But it's not just a loss. Do you know whose hands those data might be? Of course, it might be in the hands of Iya Lepa, you know, or the woman selling corn and then she's staring it and somebody say, what? You know, so secure data matters. You must limit access in terms of identifiers on the information. Do not collect identifiers. When there's no need for it, the only time you collect identifiers is if you want to come back to that person and follow up, and then you delink it. The number on the records might be AAA, but there's a notebook that says AAA is Morenike Ukpong, and that notebook is locked securely. Okay, and after you're done with the data, you must have plan about its destruction or destructions. In the past, you used to destroy after 10 years, but now there are ways you must retain it because data is gold. Data is the new world gold. Certificate of confidentiality matters. Nigeria has certificate of confidentiality. When you're collecting data on sensitive issues, you must gets a certificate of confidentiality through the ethics committee, who gets it from the National Health Research Ethics Code. The certificate of confidentiality is issued by the Ministry of Justice. And why is this important? Remember that we're talking about confidentiality, not secret. I repeat, we're talking of confidentiality in research, not secret. In medical practice, the ethics governing medical practice is different from the ethics governing research. In medical practice, you have emergency. In research, there's no emergency. Research is not, there's no emergency about research. However, when it comes to data, you can share secrets with your patient. You cannot secret. There's no place for secrets in research. However, so it means that if you go to the court of law and they say, divulge this data, you have to divulge it. If you do not have the certificate of confidentiality, if you are a medical person, and I can share an example with you. Kudus, I hope I'm doing well with time. I don't have time here with me. Please let me know if I'm doing well with time or not.
Yeah,
I'm out well.
to the top of the hour.
Pardon?
I said we have 4 minutes to the top of the hour.
All right, I have to rush now. I'm not going to give you an example. These are your vulnerable populations: children, pregnant women, prisoners, individuals with impaired decision making, economically disadvantaged person. You can say that everybody in Africa is economically disadvantaged, but this is all students and employees. When you talk about feasibility, please know that you have to think about the possibility of doing that research well. You look at scientific feasibility. Can this research question be answered? Is the method that you want to do appropriate? And you look at practical feasibility. Can you recruit enough participants before you go ahead to the field? Can you assess the populations that are needed and the expertise and resources you need? Is it available? You also then look at the ethical feasibility. The risk, can you minimize it? Is it justified to take people through that risk? Can you maximize the benefit? And do you have an acceptable risk-benefit ratio? Finally, when we talk about budget, you must look at the budget. You must plan for the budget. Some ethics committee ask you to submit your budget. So you look at the direct cost in terms of compensation that is necessary, data security, consent form processing, and translations, the readiness, accessibility, and the monitoring and the audit that happens, and the indirect cost that comes, including IRBs, administrative costs. Some people will say, take a training and submit the certificate. CIS is free for Nigeria, but in many places it's not free. Okay, and other things in terms of time, safeguards that you need to put in place for vulnerable populations, and your data management plan. Please note that there are a few pitfalls that you need to avoid. Never start recruiting before ethics approval. It's so common, especially when you students are already late, and then at the end of the day you collect your data and you never even get ethics approval, and then your teacher starts to pity you. It's really wrong practice. Always wait. Do your consenting properly. Ensure that the person understands. Use plain language. Do not understand the time. Underestimate the time needed for your study. Building buffer time. Confidentiality matters. I've talked about it. Consult IT early so that you ensure that protection is in place and you would not have the problem of data leakage. Compensate appropriately and ensure that you document every single thing. To have a folder for your research and document every single thing. On that note, I also say thank you. Apologies, we've come to the top of the hour, and I hope we can answer the questions. Over to you, Dr. Lawal.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think it's succinct and all aspects have been well covered. I'm sure the participants have picked a couple of things to go on with and to start practicing in their research. There are a couple of questions on the chat box. I'll take the 2 questions I can see here. The first one is asking, concerning risk management in research, the questionnaire exposes a previous crime. How should a researcher respond? And if it was under some privacy terms or anonymity, what is the ethical response of the researcher?
I think excellent question, because that is the kind of thing you must anticipate in your research. Your research, remember, you're not sharing secrets. Your research, if you know that there's that risk that you will find things against the law. For example, you might detect a pedophilia in your data collection or a person with a crime. You would have anticipated that this kind of data will come. In your informed consent, you will tell them the limit of the confidentiality. Anything that is within the law for me to report, I would report. You have to declare that in the consenting process, okay, because you have anticipated those risks. Of course, I can't be doing collecting data on carries, and then I'll be finding out that somebody is a murderer. There's no path of that. But if I'm collecting a history of crime, and I went to the prisons. At the end of the day, this person was in prison because he stole phone, and then you end up revealing that he was the one that killed Bala Ige. Your confidentiality does not cover that. Much more if in life they end up knowing that believe me, you're going to jail. So you must anticipate the risk, and you must disclose it in your informed consent that within the law, within the ambit of the law, if there's anything that you know that you need to report, you let them know. Does it mean that they might hide information, black or white? That's left to them. But they are aware of the consequences of the information they're sharing with you. Thank you. Over to you, producer.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have a 6th-year medical student from University of Lusaka who is asking about data protection. He or she wants to know that as supervisors allow access to data of studies conducted by their supervising, by the people they supervised.
That's a big question. Once again, please know what it is in terms of the rules of your land. I've spoken a lot about the rules of the land in Nigeria. Having said that, that's one of the concerns about data collection and the limit of data collection. You can't transfer data without getting. I consented to give you data to study A and B. I can't transfer the data I gave you consent to without getting fresh consent either from the participant or a waiver from the ethics committee to transfer that data somewhere else. That's a crime. If they catch you, it's a crime. Of course, many people don't know their rights and the limits of the rights, but you can't transfer data without consent or without appropriate documentation of such. Data's use is limited for the authorization for which it is used. I hope that helps. Over to you, producer.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So thank you, Marada. There's a question asking about consent in the area of high level of illiteracy, where you may only be able to get verbal consent and participants can't write nor sign.
Yes, please go read. It's a lot. Please read the code. It's there explicitly how you collect consent. I personally, I don't believe the word illiteracy. It doesn't exist. I think it's dehumanizing against the power of the indigenous knowledge that people have. There's nobody, of course, people might not understand your English, but that doesn't make them illiterate. The illiteracy is a relative term based on your own content. Of course, if you ask them about do you know how to do the IFA, you're an illiterate now. You can't do IFA the way that you would do. Or can you do farming the way they do? Of course, you're an illiterate farmer. But it doesn't make you an illiterate per se. So I'm careful of the kind of use of word and the context in which you use it. Having said that, please note that there's a whole regulation around how you take verbal consent. And believe me, if you go through that, you'll rather go through understood consent. And if you know that your research participants are low literate, go low literate now. Use the language that they know. If I speak broken to you, what won't she understand? If you speak a local language to her, won't she understand? So what are you talking about? It's about contextualizing the reality of the ground. However, I'm sure things are not always that black and white. And if they have done that, there's a place for thumbprint. It's not always signing. Thumbprint also is very valid. Okay, well done. Excellent questions. Over to you, Kudus. We are 4 minutes over time. I think we are good.
Yes, I think we can just take one more, then we wrap it up.
Okay then.
Okay, yeah. So I'm trying to understand the waiver of documentation and minimal risk. You said that only a signature is needed here. Does this mean for higher risk one would require more documents to prove consent?
I'm not clear with the question. Consent is consent. The higher risk has to do with forms of risk and review process. If the risk is high, which means you're dealing with vulnerable population or intrusive, a full committee will review. If it's minimum risk, then you might have an exempt or expedited review. I was looking at review. I'm not sure how that applies to the question. I'm very sorry. I don't understand it. And could just, if you do understand it, please respond to the question. Thank you.
The question is not so clear to me as well. I'm sure the person is mixing up some different concepts. So you can send a message that would to clarify your question, then we'll take it up from there.
Yeah, please feel free to send it through your coordinator, and then we can respond and send it back to you through your coordinator. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for having me, and over to you, Kudus. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof, for that input. And like I mentioned at the start of the session, that we had two series of training, one last year and another one that just concluded last week on ethics in research. Some of the questions asked have been addressed in those videos. So I've asked that the YouTube link be shared to you guys. I'm seeing a question on retrospective study and how consent is getting for it. The lecture series have answers to that. So please go through those YouTube sessions and you have answers to it. And the HREC code is freely accessible online where you can download and also go through it. So you have enough materials to get information from. And if there is still need for clarification, as Prof has mentioned, through your program director, you can send messages to us and it will be all addressed. With that, I'll be handing over to, I'm sure it's Michael.
Yes,
According to
sir.
this. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Morenike. Thank you, Dr. Kudus. This session has been insightful, and the past 1 hour I've been really attentive, and it's not just because I want to be attentive, but because every word has really hit a point in me, and I feel like each and every one of us here has learned a thing or two, if not more. So thank you very much, Prof. Morenike, for making our time to be here with us, despite these challenges that we were told you're facing. Thank you, Dr. Kudus, for helping us organize things as well. Really appreciate you guys, you're showing up and you learning us and giving us the knowledge and skill. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I guess it's a good night to everybody, and see you on Saturday. Have a wonderful day and have a wonderful week. Bye.